I'm Dr. Paul with Online Chiropractic Marketing Systems, and I offer marketing training and consulting services to help chiropractors maximize their practice potential, really so they can live the lifestyle they want and pursue their dreams and passions. And I've opened 77 chiropractic offices in 20 states, seeing over 600,000 patient visits annually and over 30,000 new patients a year. And so the topic we're really going to talk about today is a very singular, probably one of the singular most important topics there are, which is motivation. And we're gonna kind of do a deep dive into motivation. We're going to talk about, we're going to relate it to doctor motivation, we're going to relate it to patient motivation, we're going to relate it to staff motivation. We're just going to talk about human motivation and how it'll affect your business and your understanding and awareness of motivation. And the more you can control it, then the more effective and successful you will be. And maybe you might not be aware of some of the factors that are actually inhibiting you. And so this might also shed some light on what might be inhibiting you and ways to also to eliminate what's inhibiting you. So what we're going to do is just kind of start right off here. And I talked about there's three major components that I frequently see on why chiropractors don't do well if they don't. And number one is the knowledge, number two is the motivation, and number three is the discipline. And I kind of break this out a little bit more. In the knowledge, there's essentially four stages of awareness. And remember, when you run a small business, there's four major categories to maximizing your time for money in the first level of making money. Remember, there's three ways of making money: exchanging your time for money, leveraging your money, and leveraging your time. And each of the latter depend on the knowledge base of the primary. And so the primary, the core components of the primary, which is maximizing your time for money, there's really four categories. It's getting new business. It doesn't matter if you're a chiropractor, dentist, you sell computers, it doesn't matter. So it's getting, all of these apply to every type of business. And so it's getting new business. Number two, it's repeat purchases. In chiropractic, that's called retention. And then the fees you charge, and then the overhead that you have. Those are going to be the four categories that's going to determine your time for money. So we're gonna talk about the knowledge base. So in the knowledge category, again, there's four stages of knowledge, and most people are not even aware of the stages of knowledge, going from unconscious incompetence. In other words, you don't even know what you don't know in those four categories of business: getting new business, retention, overhead, or fees, to from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. In other words, maybe you've had books, seminars, and tapes, and maybe you're aware of it, but you don't have the knowledge or skill to actually process it. And then from there, it's actually training that takes you into the conscious competence level. And this is where most people actually fall out and lose sight of their dreams right there. And then from there, the conscious competence to the unconscious competence level. In other words, you unconsciously just have the ability and you have the knowledge and new skill to get new business, retention. You know the common factors with fees and overhead. And so that's typically number one. And the third category is discipline. Discipline, and that's why oftentimes, and this is going to be real important relative to the motivation that we're talking about today. What affects discipline? So we're going to talk important about that. And then also the differences between a trainer, a consultant, or a coach, and how it can impact discipline. But really, we're going to go into motivation, because motivation is really the core of everything in your life, your success in life in every category, not just financial, emotional, physical. It's really about motivation and understanding human motivation. It's so important that Donald Trump, the real estate mogul, actually said of all the business knowledge that he has accumulated, he said the number one factor that is most important in business is understanding human motivation. Because that's all relationships. It doesn't matter if it's a relationship, business relationship, personal relationship. It's all about understanding human motivation. So let's go into and try to clarify some of these categories of motivation. So the very first category we're going to look at here is personal motivation, in that your clarity. Do you have clarity with what you do? And so we talk about the importance of clarity, because it's the answer to your why question is why you will do what you do every day in your life. And that is the big key right there, in understanding the variables that are involved. And of course, if you're practicing, this is not only important for you, it's obviously the most important part of it is for you, but Also for your staff is understanding staff motivation through human motivation. And this is especially important if you want associates or you want to open multiple offices. Because if you understand these core components, you can naturally bring on associates who already have what I call inherent internal motivation. And there's really three types of motivation. There's really internal, external, and circumstantial. And we're going to go over those in great detail and how you can impact and which one of those are way more important. So we'll go over in great detail. And so if you have associates or you're going to open offices or another business, the one of the very core components of that is finding somebody with natural inherent motivation or drive. And there's ways to assess that and find those types of people. So we're going to start with clarity, which is why you do what you do. So let's go ahead and get started here and pick back up. And if we could, let's go into, if you could explain again, and let's see where we are. And Joe, we'll start with you. And what we're looking at again is, remember, we're trying to put a little pressure on you to step up to the plate. And so that's why I said, imagine if you were in front of the board and you've been accused of overutilization, and you now have to explain to the board. So let's say that I'll be the board and Tom will be the board. And so you have to explain to us why the treatments that you use justify, and so it's professional, ethical, moral, and for the good of the patient. Now, before we do that, we talked about patient number differentials. We talked about average number of patients doctors can see physically and emotionally if they knew good marketing. And typically I found that to be about 180 to 220 patient visits a week in and week out, where they're not burned out. Now, Dr. Joe says about 300. He's got a little bit higher of an energy level. So, and he's done that before. So that's why we're going to say, yeah, that's probably fits in his realm. And then we look at the difference of what you are doing versus what you want to do. That gives us what's called a patient differential. And so if we look, Joe, in your case, we talked about you want to be at 300. Your present average patient volume is what per week?
155 a week.
Okay, so that's 145 patient visit differential. And so how we get to that point is we'll divide your patient retention, what your model of patient retention, into that number, and that'll tell us how many more new patients that you will need to reach that 300 mark. And then we can match marketing systems that will produce that amount of patients. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, Tom? Does that make sense, Tom? Okay. All right. Now, so the very first component of any business is retention. Let's face it. If you had a one patient retention, and you wanted to see 300 a week, you'd have to see 300 new patients a week, or 1,200 a month, if you had a one patient retention. If your patient was 2, it'd be half of that. If it was 4, it'd be 25% of that. So all business starts with retention and how well you keep your existing business, because the less you keep your existing business, the more time and money you have to spend going and get business, which means it's going to be not as profitable, and it's going to be more costly for your overhead. So it affects your whole business model. So we start with retention for that particular purpose. So, and we're going to say this is a retention model. We understand there's variables. There's young people, old injuries, new injuries. We understand that nobody's the same. So having said that, we're going to say a median. We are going to use a model. So we're going to use a baseline model. Now, in your real practice, you'll have these other variables and considerations. And so we said, what was your patient retention model what was the number, Joe, that you wanted? What was your model?
60 patient visits average.
How many?
60.
Now, that wasn't the number the last time we talked, was it?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. You tell me, we're on the board. You tell me how you can justify 60 visits.
Well, first, I use the functional model, which can take a person from inflammatory phase to repair phase to the remodel phase. The way I break it up is that in the inflammatory phase, we'd be seeing a patient at 3 times a week for the first 2 weeks. Then, and in that phase, the inflammatory phase, we're decreasing the inflammation. We're also decreasing the pain intensity. Then we move on to the repair phase, where we
Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Let me just kind of work with you here. So in the inflammation phase, you'd see him 3 times a week for 6 weeks. So you're saying that the inflammation phase, or excuse me, 3 weeks, or excuse me, 2 weeks, 3 times a week for 2 weeks. So you're saying that the inflammation phase could last up to 2 weeks. You're going to see him 3 times a week for 2 weeks. That's 6 visits, right?
Right.
Well, okay. What's that?
So I was going to start seeing them daily, but I'm just basing off on my own, but I didn't do this. So I would.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. Let's just work with it, okay? Okay. So you're at 6 visits for the inflammation phase, and you said the goal, your therapeutic goal, is what?
Is to decrease pain and inflammation.
Okay. All right. Now what happens?
So now we move on to the repair phase, and the repair phase is still at 3 times a week for the next 4 weeks.
Okay, and so that's 12 visits. And physiologically, why are you going to see the patient for 12 visits and bill them? Why?
Because when we're working with the muscles so that we can increase tissue strength and the adjustment, we're going to affect the tissues by remodeling them. Well, we're going to affect the tissues by changing the inflammation that's caused the scar tissue. We're breaking up the scar tissue essentially that develops.
Okay, so you're going to work to increase strength and affect the scar tissue. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Anything else?
We're going to decrease the nerves that are within the scar tissue.
Okay.
And we're going to sensitivity of the nerves in that area.
Okay. So I'm hearing 3 times a week for 12 visits. Your therapeutic goal is to increase the strength, affect the scar tissue, break up any potential scar tissue that's healing, decrease the nerves, and decrease the sensitivity. Is that what I've heard? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, that's 12 visits. So right now you're at 18 total. So now what?
Now we go down to 2 times a week for the next week.
Okay, and what are you trying to do there?
And we're still within the repair phase.
Okay, so you're still trying to accomplish the same. You're just decreasing the frequency of treatment.
Yes.
Okay, so that takes us to
16 more.
That's it. We're at 34 right now, right?
Right.
Okay, now what? Is that it or what?
Now we're in the remodel phase. We're seeing at one time over the next 6 weeks. This is when we give them strengthening exercises.
Once a week for how long?
26 weeks.
26 weeks, okay. So that's 26 visits. And what's the goal in the remodel phase? What's the therapeutic goal? Why are you seeing the patient and charging them money?
Because we need to increase the tissue strength and in turn increase the tissue elasticity at that phase.
Okay, so 6. Okay, so that takes you to your 60 visits, right?
Yes.
Okay, now, Tom, you're on the board. Scale 1 to 10. How well did you buy that?
I thought it was pretty good. I bought into it. He was logical about his treatment. He could explain why he was doing it. If I'm not familiar with the 3 phases of healing, I'd probably be more skeptical. Because a lot of these chiropractors have never even heard of the 3 phases of healing. But for me, I thought he did good.
Okay. So scale 1 to 10, what would you say?
At least an 8.
An 8. Okay, scale of 8. So you brought him up to an 8. Now, what could he do, Tom, to be a 10?
I think if he was more clear, I think presentation. Maybe some kind of support for each of those, you know?
When you say support, what are you talking about?
Well, when he brought in and cited a couple of articles or explained the 3 phases of healing, like I said, if I wasn't familiar with it, then adding support of like referencing a couple of third-party sources.
Now, you realize when you're on court testifying on behalf of a patient, you are the source. You don't bring in sources, you are the source.
Well, I didn't realize that, but I would still try to cite other people. But
okay, so shouldn't he be the source? He's the doctor.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say separate out content versus delivery, because I'm hearing a distinction here. All right.
Okay.
So scale 1 to 10, content.
I don't have any problem. Content was fine.
Now, Tom, I'm going to ask you. You just interviewed him. He's your associate. You're leaving him in your office because you're going to take a 6-month trip to Europe. Are you okay with that knowledge base?
Yeah, I am. I'm okay with it.
Okay. So you're totally fine. You wouldn't want it to be better. You're totally 100% fine with that.
No, I always want him to be better. That's why I gave him an 8. I don't know why he's not a 10, but I'm pretty happy with what he understands and him justifying and explaining to somebody else. But I don't know why he's not a 10.
Okay, what about delivery? Scale 1 to 10 delivery.
Still at 6, 7. No, I'd still say an 8. I like his delivery. You didn't trip him up. He didn't stumble very much. You had to have him clarify a few things, but he didn't hesitate or say, well, I'm not sure. He seemed fairly confident that he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah, I would agree with you that there's justification. Do I have justification to revoke his license based on what he just said?
No, and you didn't make any complaints about what he said.
Right. No. He's basing his care on the science and the physiology of healing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So could he definitely be more thorough and detailed with the content? Yes. Could his presentation be cleaner and sharper? Yes. Okay. Now, why is that important? Why is that important? Why am I pointing out his content, knowledge, and his form of delivery?
Because it's about credibility, and we judge credibility based on the verbal cues rather than on the visual cues, not so much as what you're saying is the way you're saying it.
Well, confidence, we're talking about motivation here is the subject. So how does his ability to deliver, how does that relate to his motivation?
Well, the word clarity keeps popping into my head. How clarity and clarity and motivation go hand in hand, right?
Well, I'm asking you, right?
Yeah, that's what pops right into my head in response to your answer. If you don't have clarity, then your motivation won't be there. And he has pretty good clarity.
What happens if we keep working on his clarity and delivery? What happens to his motivation?
It should go up.
Is there any way that it can't?
Unless you find out his clarity and motivation are not in harmony.
Exactly. But if they're in harmony, what will naturally, automatically happen with motivation?
Motivation should absolutely go up then.
So how important is it to have clarity in content and delivery with what you do?
It would be critical.
That's right. That's exactly why we're talking about this right now. That's exactly why. So let's go ahead and just reverse it out now. And by the way, having said that, Do you think I might be able to personally affect your motivation if I constantly work with you on content and delivery?
Yeah, that should really work.
You think I might use that, Tom?
Yeah, I think you might.
Do you think I might have used that with associates when I trained them?
Yeah, my clarity on this is starting to grow, that you definitely use this on your associates.
Yeah, and by me using you in front of him, why am I using you?
Why are you using me?
To critique him.
Because now my clarity is increasing. Because you're using peer pressure and putting me on the spot to force me to come clear, just the way you did it to him a second ago.
It's a little easier for you to be objective when you're looking at somebody else, right?
Sure. Very much easier.
So what happens to your paradigm and how you see it when you see it happening with somebody else as opposed to yourself?
Yeah, I see it much more clearly. And my paradigm does much shift a little bit.
Can you see how that might be an effective learning tool?
It'd be a great learning tool.
To shift a paradigm. It's an excellent learning tool in many ways, and we'll go over learning tools. So yes, can we affect Dr. Joe's motivation by working with him, by him even studying more to increase his clarity, his knowledge base, his delivery? Can we affect his motivation, his confidence? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. So be aware of this. Is this important to know for yourself? Yeah. Is it important to know for your staff members, for the things that they're going to be doing in your office?
Yes.
You think it might be good that your staff member is trained in 101 chiropractic healing? You think it might be beneficial if your staff member knew how to explain patient care scientifically? What do you think?
It's beneficial. It's super beneficial.
What do you think will happen to their motivation when you work with them and teach them and have them be able to explain with higher clarity what you do as a chiropractor in your office? You think that might affect how they feel about their job?
Yeah.
Significantly. And so it's always a part of training. So Tom, let's go to you real quick and go ahead. Same situation. If you can explain, you're in front of the board and you have to justify your treatment protocol. And so remember, all we do is we take your average versus where you want to be. That gives a patient differential. We just divide that by your retention model. What's your retention model, patient visit wise?
Well, it's functional and structural. I use CVP, the biomechanics, to fix reverse curves or structural.
Give me a number.
40 visits.
Okay, so go ahead and explain to me the rationalization of why somebody should pay and stay for 40 visits.
Well, the first 2 weeks are the inflammatory process, and to reduce inflammation typically takes 8 visits, so it's 4 times a week for 2 weeks. We use adjustments and light massage, ice, and rest to decrease the inflammation during that time.
Do me a favor and don't tell me what therapies you use. Just tell me physiologically what you're trying to do.
We're trying to decrease inflammation during the inflammatory phase, which is 2 weeks, and on average 8 visits in the first 2 weeks.
Okay, so you'll see him 4 times a week for 2 weeks.
Yep.
Okay, so that's 8 visits, and physiologically you're just trying to work on what?
Decreasing inflammation.
Okay, decreasing inflammation. Anything else?
No. Do you want me to mention the functional assessments we use?
What about pain?
Well, decreasing inflammation is going to decrease pain. That's our top priority.
Okay. So
When
you
you
want to,
increase them, yeah,
so you're going to want to decrease pain. Because remember that there's 3 different types of pain, right?
right,
There's direct trauma, nerve trauma. Then there's inflammatory, which causes, that's a different mechanism, right, than direct trauma to a nerve.
right.
And then there's psychogenic. So there's 3 different types of pain. All of them may be treated differently, right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so you're at 8 visits for working with pain and inflammation. Now what?
We go into the repair phase. On average, that's about 6 weeks. And we're seeing them 3 times a week for the whole 6 weeks.
Okay, and what are you trying to do physiologically?
Trying to restore normal function.
What does that mean?
That would be increasing range of motion. That
Okay.
would be decreasing any of the activities of daily living. We would be making sure that there's no pain with any type of movement. Essentially, we're trying to restore 100% or as close to 100% normal function in their joints of the neck or their back or whatever part we're working on.
Do you understand, Tom? Let me interrupt you. Do you understand function is a generic, general word?
Yeah, it is.
Do you understand that if I ask somebody, if I ask 10 different people on the street to explain what restoring natural function is, do you understand I'd have a wide variety of answers?
Yes, you would.
So could you be more specific?
Sure. We're trying to restore normal range of motion in each of the joints that we're working on. We're also trying to restore the ligamentous integrity of the damaged joints that were inflamed. In other words, we're trying to make them more flexible. We're trying to make them stronger. We're trying to decrease their sensitivity. And we're also trying to restore normal shape. If they had an abnormal curve, we're trying to correct that postural or structural abnormality as much as possible.
Okay, anything else physiologically?
No, that's it.
Okay, and so in the second phase, you'd see him, you said how many weeks was that?
3 times a week for 6 weeks.
Okay, 3 times a week for 6, that's 18. So you're at 18 and 8. So you're at 26. So what happens next?
Then we go into the remodel phase. And our goal during the remodel phase is to add strength to the ligaments and further improve the structure. So we're trying to change the shape, correct the alignment, make sure everything's straight where it's supposed to be straight, curved where it's supposed to be curved, and make sure the ligaments are healing with as much strength and flexibility as possible.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it.
And what was the duration and frequency of treatment?
During that time period, I want to see them once a week for exercises, traction, stretching, and adjustments.
For how long?
I want them doing exercises and stretching at home 3 times a week.
No, I'm talking about your services you're billing for.
No, that's once a week. And we would do that for, let's say, 10 weeks.
Okay. So you're at 36 visits now.
Yeah.
You said 40 when we started.
Then I'm going to have to say 14 weeks.
Okay. Okay. So remember we talked about specificity increases clarity. Would you like it if your dentist said, I'm going to go ahead and do a filling in one of these 2 teeth?
No.
Do you think that might be important as communicating as a physician, Tom?
Yes.
Okay. It is important. Now, so a little better, right? A little better than last time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we want to be pretty much experts in delivery in content?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. Do we want to pretty much be experts in delivery?
Yeah, we do.
And the main reason we want to do this is why? It's for you. As you increase your content, your knowledge base, and your delivery, the byproduct is your confidence. Your confidence will go up, which will affect your motivation. And I'll go into that here in just a little bit more. in just a second. Now let's go ahead and talk about motivational models, and let's integrate them and see how they kind of work with one another, okay? So that's what we're going to go into right now. Now, there's different types of motivational models. Sigmund Freud was a motivational model. And of course, the most common motivational model that is used in today's time is Abraham Maslow. And he wrote a book called Human Motivation. And basically, he just defines very specific characteristics individually that have natural higher preponderance of that people will do, that have a higher priority and that they will do. And that's called the hierarchy of needs. So we're going to match. We're going to talk about that with a couple other motivational models. And then we're going to tie it into you. We're going to tie it into patients. And we're going to tie it into staff. And we'll tie it into associate doctors. In other words, human life. That's what we're going to talk about. So when we talk about why you do what you do, of course, that's your purpose. And so the highest reason, the highest natural motivation you'll do what you do, based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is survival. And of course, that's to get out of survival. And he identified those as the physiological needs. Food, shelter, oxygen, sex is the primary physiological needs. So when you have restrictions or limitations in those categories, nothing else will really matter. You will go out of your comfort zone. You will go out of your way. You will spend extra time and money to get that taken care of. So that's the primary need. Then there's the secondary need of security. Security won't matter if you don't have a primary need. Matter of fact, you will actually violate your natural security to get survival. People will rob banks for money to survive. They will challenge their security. So that's why it's a hierarchy, because one is way more prevalent than the one is more prevalent than the one below it. So when we talked about security, and we're going to relate this to you, this is going to be very, very big when it relates to your motivation. This is going to be very big. And then we talk about after the security. So in other words, you have your food, shelter, sex, oxygen taken care of. Your drive will naturally go down. There'll still be some motivation. Now, this is inherent natural motivation. And so until you have security. Now, that could be in many forms. It could be physical security, emotional security, psychological security, financial security. So there's many types of security. And then the third one is the socialization. You really won't care about going out and meeting people and participating in groups if one of the first two categories are not being fulfilled. If you're insecure psychologically, emotionally, physically, or if you're in survival, you're really not going to care about going out and being part of a socialized group. So after those two needs are met, then the socialization becomes more important. Then the materialism, and then of course after that it's self-actualization. Now let's compare that. Let's do a parallel analogy to other reasons why you will do what you do. So we talked about the importance of why you will do what you do, and I'm going to use two other models. I'm going to compare these models and interface them. One of them is the lowest form that you will do things for is money. After money, a higher form is personal gain. After personal gain is conviction, and after conviction is a sense of duty. And so what happens is, if you're in survival, money is very important. After you're out of survival and security, money, the motivation of money significantly deteriorates and goes down significantly. And I guess I'm talking about normal models. I will explain later aberrations, and understanding these aberrations are going to be very important when you're dealing with staff and associates or opening offices. So money, because most people think that people are motivated by money. Well, it's one of the lowest forms of motivation there is. And the only time it's really a high motivating factor is when you're in survival or your security is being challenged. That's when money becomes very important, because it will get you out of that. And once you have survival and security, money is a very low motivating force. So how does this relate to maybe staff members? Well, if a staff member's having trouble financially, paying their mortgage, etc., money could be very important to that person. But if they're not, and you give them just money for a Christmas gift, that's not a motivation. It's pleasure, and it's okay and nice, but it doesn't have the motivation as it does. That's not as an important of a factor. Then comes personal gain. And when you climb up hierarchy's ladder, now you're talking about pride, ego, these kinds of things. It's still a very narcissistic world. The world is still revolving around you. So after money, the next motivating factor, and by the way, on this side, these are demotivating factors. So money is a very low motivating factor. It really depends on where you're at, how motivating that is. If you're in survival security, then it will be. But after that, it is not. It is a very low motivating factor. And then personal gain, pride, ego, things of that nature, recognition, that becomes important. But that's still narcissistic. And then after that comes conviction. Now you will do things at a much greater, at a much more vigor if you have conviction. A conviction is more of a deep-seated belief, and you only get a conviction really two ways. Either through emotional trauma will create a conviction, or desire over time. And one of the examples that I use with conviction is probably Michael J. Fox probably did not donate 1 penny to Parkinson's prior to him being diagnosed with Parkinson's. Now, he had a personal emotional experience. In other words, he has it. He not only has it, but he has it in the worst form, in the worst category of life, which is it's challenging his primordial needs. So it's absolutely the highest form of motivation there is. If that disease was only affecting materialism, there wouldn't be much motivation with Michael J. Fox and Parkinson's disease. And that's one of the reasons why there's such an uproar with Obamacare. See, when there was problems with Benghazi or problems with the IRS, those weren't personal to people. But now it's very personal because it's their health care. It's their survival. It's now going deep into their core as a human being. And that's why it's creating such uproar, way more than all these other topics. You're talking about the individual survival, their health care. You're fooling with a primary need. And that's why this is so volatile compared to other stories. The motivation is naturally higher. Now, after the consequences are the conviction, then comes self-actualization. And of course, that's when you will do things that are not narcissistic. And same with conviction. They're not centric based. When you talk about a sense of duty, that's when you're talking about, your child, your country, your God. And so that's why when you're in the military, they won't say, let me pay you, X amount of money to go to war. I mean, the worst soldiers that were known were the Hessians that were bought soldiers, German soldiers essentially, that were bought. They had no stake in the war at all. And so they had the absolute lowest form of motivation. Yet you'll find somebody who has a sense of duty, such as the Medal of Honor winners recently. Money wasn't involved, personal gain wasn't involved, conviction was definitely there, but it was a sense of duty. And that's why they ran through bullets and sacrificed their life to go pick up dead soldiers and friends and bring them back to the Jeep and fly them out of there. They totally sacrificed their survival. That's called sense of duty. They would not have done that for a few grand. And so the motivating factor for a sense of duty is off the charts. And that's why jihadists that's why they'll strap a bomb to their back and go into a mall and just blow everybody up. It's not because of the money. It's not because of for the personal gain. It's definitely a conviction. It's a conviction in jihad, but they're doing it for a higher purpose, their God. And so It's a very different animal. So it's a double-edged sword. If it's a good thing, if what you're doing is a good thing for humanity and you're doing it for good, you can have there's tremendous persistence and resilience, and that is typically where major things get done. But also, it's a double-edged sword that if you have bad intentions and you're doing it for a sense of duty, you will reap a lot of bad. So it depends on where that's at within the individual. So how does that relate, and how does that connect to Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Well, when you're in the first or second, when you're in your survival or security, you need to do it about the money. And it should be about the money because that's what will get you out of survival or security. Personal gain is always narcissistic, egocentric. That's never a good commodity. And it's not lasting. So most people, they'll go through perpetual, it'll create negative behavior, and it's not very lasting, and it won't create a lot of motivation when you're doing something for personal gain. And a lot of times when people spot that it's personal gain, they'll reject you. So personal gain is not a good motivating factor either. Conviction. And conviction is where there's a tremendous amount of persistence and determination and focus. And that's typically when you have that's why I say you have a personal emotional experience. And the emotional experience is typically painful, not pleasurable. So that's why when you compare it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and once you're in survival or security, those are human pain-based. And I'm not talking about physical pain. It could be psychological, emotional, perceptual. So those are pain-based motivating factors. Now, once you go above the security and you go into socialization, that's no longer pain-based. You don't need socialization to live. You need it to thrive, but you don't need it to survive. Same with materialism. That's a pleasure-based motivation. So these are very weak motivations until you get out of yourself and you do it for self-actualization. Then it's no longer about you. It's about a stronger, bigger cause. So how does this relate to you as a chiropractor, you in your business, potential patients, staff, associate doctors? Well, I'll just give you an example. One of the worst types of clients that I have to deal with is somebody who has what I call just lukewarm motivation. And what typically causes lukewarm motivation is when a doctor typically sees around 100 to maybe 140 patient visits a week, especially that 120, 140 mark. Because typically the money that's made in that area is typically a low six-figure income. So they can live good. It takes them out of survival. It takes them out of security. And they actually live decently. Now, typically they're spending everything they make to live like the doctor, so they don't have any other assets. And that's called big hat, no cattle. Dr. Stanley, the millionaire next door, by the way, if you get a chance, you should read that. It's a scientific study of millionaires and who and why became millionaires. But he termed it big hat, no cattle because basically people are spending all their money to live a certain lifestyle and they have no assets, and all their money is needed to perpetuate that lifestyle. So what happens is people, when they're in that 120 patient visit to 140, they're not in survival. The motivation's not there. The deepest motivation isn't there. They're not in security. They typically will live in a nice house, nice neighborhood, be a member of the country club, have new cars. They're spending everything to live that life, and they got to go back to work the next day to do it all over again. To get that person to go above that, see, there's that it takes away the internal motivation. So you have to tap into other factors. Now, I will qualify that. There's something I call a pain thermometer. Each of us have a certain level of motivation. And we all don't have the same motivation. I always wondered why, when I made decent money and I started making better money and, I had the house and the cars and all that. Then I had one office, two offices, three offices. Why did I keep pushing? what had to do with what's called internal motivation, not circumstantial motivation and not external. I call that the pain thermometer. And essentially what happens with that, and I will talk about this in great detail, it is the greatest core of motivation there is. And essentially what happens is the person's psyche, the psyche of the pain is at a higher level than other people. And when that happens, they will continue to drive and push because in their eyes, they're still pushing to get ahead, so to speak. And a lot of this is subconscious. And so what happens is the people who have below average, what I call set thermometers, those are people that you might think of as loafers, that they're underachievers. And these things are set, in my experience and my research, in childhood. These are impressions that are given to us in childhood. So this is very important to understand, when, especially with yourself, because it is very difficult when I have a client who is, and I'll give you an example of what would be called a low pain-based thermometer or lower achiever. Here's the classic. Is somebody who was raised in a good lifestyle. Their parents were maybe white-collar professionals, six-figure incomes. In other words, they got everything. So they didn't have to work for anything. They didn't have to push for anything. There was no pain. In other words, so what happened is their motivation lowered significantly. And I have a friend like this, but after we talked about it, he recognizes it. But everybody thinks they have the same motivation or higher. So when we explain this, he would only do his business. He wouldn't do anything for his business at all. I mean, nothing. As long as he was paying the bills, even a little below the bills. He wouldn't do anything. You couldn't get him to do anything. The motivation was gone. But soon as he couldn't pay the bills and it went into survival, he would kick in and start going. But as soon as he kicked in and started pushing a little more, and he made a little more money, and he was able to pay his bills again, he cut off again. His actions totally stopped again. And so my point is, when we went to his history, he was an only child. His parents didn't do exceptionally well, but he was an only child, and his parents gave him everything. And he was never pushed to do anything. He was never without. And so that lowered the intrinsic, what I call pain thermometer. So he was imprinted. He was imprinted with a lower natural motivation. Because now, how does that play out in society? Here's how it plays out in society. Wealth goes through 3 generations because of exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not aware of it, wealth typically goes through 3 generations. And typically what happens is the first generation, and if you want to use an example of the immigrants that came over, they were dirt poor. They were in survival. So they had to bust their butt. They were highly motivated because they were in survival to pay their bills and stabilize. Then they had kids. And then their kids were taught tremendous work ethic because that's what they saw their parents doing, busting their butt. And their parents didn't allow anything else. But now they had enough money to go to school. So the second generation had the great work ethic. They had the motivation and they had the money to get educated, to go to school, to have a better life. The generation doesn't want to give to their kids what they saw in their parents. They give everything to their kids. They don't show this drive and motivation. Their kids typically have bad imprinting with work ethic. They don't have the, what I call thermometer drive. They didn't have to. Their parents bought their own cars. Their parents did all this stuff for them. They didn't have to do it on their own. It was handed to them. So when they actually get into the real world, they don't have the natural drive. They don't have the skill set. They don't have the natural work ethic. And that generation loses the money. And that's why wealth goes through typically three generations. And it has to do with motivation, primarily. So when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs relative to doing it for money, doing it for personal gain, conviction. You will do things at a higher level if there's a personal, emotional, painful experience, and if that painful experience was based on a security or survival issue. Another example, I know a friend of mine, and you may know this, who volunteers and does volunteer work for cystic fibrosis. They may have cystic fibrosis, but if they don't, I guarantee you, their sister or brother or mother or father, a high circle of influence, high emotional content does. And so that's called conviction, pain-based conviction. Now, it's much greater imprinted if it's you versus somebody else, but it'll still have an effect on you if it's a high circle of influence. You won't care as much if it's somebody you don't care about that it happens to. You'll see it on the news every day, but it won't impact your life at all because there's no emotional connection there. But if it's your mother, father, brother, sister, where there's a high emotional content, and you saw the pain and suffering of cystic fibrosis or some other type of problem, that creates a sense of conviction, and it creates a duty. It increases your desire to help. These are called imprinting. And then, of course, the last one is your sense of duty. And I can use this relative to religion. You've heard of people that, have to go totally down to the bottom before they find God or their God. And that's what happens is it's totally pain-based. Well, before they did that, there's not enough pain for them to reach out and open up. And then when they drop totally down, now they're at the bottom. It's totally painful. Now they're open. The other example is maybe you know somebody that they didn't drop, but over time, and I'll use Christianity as an example. Over time, maybe they, in the earlier life, they partied and did this and a lot of what would be called sinful things. And I'm just categorizing them as the world calls them. And then it creates pain in their life. It creates distance in relationships, physical pain, emotional pain. And maybe they don't drop. There's not a thing that drops. But they finally get tired of it. And so they'll start paying attention. They'll start studying it. And I'm using religion as an example, but it could be anything. This is the process to a higher level of awareness in any topic. And so you'll see them maybe start going to church. And maybe if you don't see this person very often, maybe you see them 6 months, a year later, or a year and a half later, and they're a totally different person a year and a half later than the person, maybe they were smoking, drinking, cussing, and partying, and a year and a half later, over time, that's called conviction over time. Conviction over time. They bought in, and it evolved to change their lifestyle. So, and I'm not just referring to drinking, smoking, and partying. This is anything. So you can do anything in if you understand some of these categories. And some of them are way more difficult than others because of some of these. So how does this relate? So we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're talking about, some of the external motivation factors. And then let's go into, we talked about money-based motivation. We talked about personal gain-based motivation. We talked about conviction motivation. We talked about self-actualization. So the different types of motivation. Now remember, patients fit these categories. You fit these categories. Staff fits these categories. This is omnipresent. This is the state of the human condition somewhere in these categories. So if you can recognize kind of where somebody's at, that could be very important to your business. It could be very important to your business. So that's some of the factors relative to motivation. Then one of the topics I want to talk about is the 4 types of exchanges. And so there's 4 types of exchanges, which is, a criminal exchange. And then there's what's called a partial exchange. And then there's what's called a fair exchange. And then there's exchange in abundance. And these match up with the laws of nature, the laws of thermodynamics. There are natural laws in nature that you have to be aware of as a businessman. And those are called the laws of thermodynamics. There's many other laws, but some of the common ones are the laws of thermodynamics. An example is the law of entropy. It's a natural law. If you leave your kitchen alone, it doesn't get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner by itself. It gets dirtier and dirtier and dirty. That's the law of entropy. So when you look at the laws of thermodynamics, basically, it says there's a set amount of energy. You have to participate in that energy, and the energy is being expended in a random form called entropy. And another example of that is if you compare it to a baseball game. Number one of thermodynamics, you have to play the game. You're in the game. Number two is you have to play the game, and number three is you're going to lose the game. And the reason I point this out is oftentimes I see chiropractors that want to make, let's say, $500,000 a year or $1 million a year. And oftentimes I'll deal with them like kind of what I'm doing with you right now. And Tom just rated Joe an 8. Well, Joe doesn't think he's an 8. We don't want to think like that. And Joe doesn't want his patients to pay, and I'll just use these as digits. Joe doesn't want to give a 10 and his patients pay an 8. See, Joe thinks he's a 10, number one, but Joe thinks also the patient should pay a 10. And that's not reality. The reality is the market, in this case Tom, said after he saw Joe's clarity, he said that would be an 8. I would call that an 8. In other words, would Tom be willing to spend the time and money if you took money and put it in units comparable? Would Tom pay an 8 to get an 8? Yeah, he would. Would Tom pay a 9 to get an 8? No. Would you go to a dentist and him give you an 8 service and clarity and focus and intention, and him expect you to pay 10? How long is that relationship going to last? It doesn't. So you have to always give more than what you want. And so typically I see chiropractors performing with their clarity and their purpose and their focus at a lower level, say it's 4, 5, 6 or whatever, and they think they should just be making more money. No, they're making exactly what they deserve. They just don't know that they're performing at such a low level to get that. Market forces give you what you deserve. And so what happens is with the laws of thermodynamics is there is no equilibrium. There is no system in the universe where you put 10 units in and you get 10 units back. That's called the perpetual motion machine. It does not exist. So if you want to make $500,000 a year, you better produce $1 million in value. If you want to make $1 million, you better produce $1.5 million in value. You will never make above your clarity, your focus, your purpose, and you will never make the equal of clarity, focus, and purpose. You will always make less, and it's called the laws of thermodynamics and the laws of nature. And so chiropractors, typically, when I go through this, they're doing a partial exchange. They're doing a below average partial exchange, but they think that they should be rewarded more. And I'm like, no, you're being rewarded exactly as the market dictates. What they don't understand is they got to raise the game. They got to be better. In other words, does Joe's clarity need to be better? If Joe wants to make 10 out of 10 in payments, can he remain an 8? No. It will not. Now, can you get by with it once or twice, or can you trick people once or twice? Yeah. Sure. Every now and then, could you maybe give a 6 or 7 and get them to pay 10? Sure. Is that lasting? No way. Will they come back? No. Will they tell their friends and family to come to you for care? No. A lot of times they'll tell your friends and family not to come to you for care. So your clarity, your purpose, your focus, if you want whatever it is you want to make income-wise, based on the natural laws of exchange and the natural laws of thermodynamics, you have to raise your game. You have to be higher quality. You have to be better yourself. And you can't be equal to what you want. And I'll give you an example. When I take on clients, I have 2 objectives. Number 1, always give more value than what they're paying. Always. Number 2, I do not ever want it to be equal. I don't want somebody to pay this and me deliver exactly what they give. Because that relationship will not last. That does not create excitement and abundance. I have to give exchange in abundance. I know that. So I want two things, and this is part of my business model. And I suggest you might want to consider it for your business model. Number one, I want to be able to give them way more value. I didn't say incrementally. I didn't say 10.1. I said way more value than what they pay. Number one. And I get that frequently. When clients come on board and I start educating them how business works and marketing, it is not very long before I often hear, just when I take them through all the modules and the marketing modules, they say, boy, you delivered way more than I expected. And if I didn't get anything else, that was well worth it. I get that all the time. I want to hear that. And if I don't hear that, something's wrong. So I want to give more. Number two, when I give it, I want to give more than my competition. So there's nowhere for my clients to go. I want them to stay with me, and I want to give them way more than what they give me. That's my business model. You might want to consider that in your business model. There's not many chiropractors I talk to that think like that. Most of the time, the chiropractors don't have high clarity, don't have a guided purpose, don't have good communication, but they still expect patients to stay, pay, and refer. It's called partial exchange. That's what it's called. And then they start justifying their behavior. It's no longer the chiropractor, because you can't do that, because that challenges your security. You can't do that. So it's got to be bad insurance, bad community, bad people. It's got to be everything else but you. So no, we got to pay attention to some of these factors. So how we got to pay attention to Maslow's hierarchy of needs relative to yourself, relative to patients, relative to staff. We got to pay attention to money, personal gain, conviction, and duty for motivating factors. We got to pay attention to exchanges for motivational factors. So if you want to make $500,000 a year, you better start thinking about producing $700,000 or $1 million a year, giving that kind of value, because Mother Nature, natural law, there is no equilibrium. There is no perpetual motion machine. There is no, you give A and you get A. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. As an example, the combustion engine. There are not very efficient energy machines. And the human engine is about 27% efficient. 27%. So if you wanted to make 270,000, based on that model, if you wanted to make $270,000 a year, you better give $1 million in value at a 27% efficiency level. So we got to pay attention. We got to rise the game, pay attention to motivation. Now, let me stop for just a second until I go to the next subject. Any questions over what we just covered?
No, it's really interesting.
No questions, Joe?
I have a question. I mean, I know doctors that give a lot less than I do, but are seeing a lot more people. Is that because of communication and clarity?
Well, it could be a lot of things, but here's one thing that's for sure, Joe. Market forces will not allow that to perpetuate, will it? If they were not giving that value, in other words, would people keep coming back if they weren't given that value?
No, they wouldn't.
So here's what we know. We know if that's what they're doing, we know they're definitely given that value. Now, in what ways are they given that value? It could be many things, but I will tell you this, Joe. It all starts with core motivation. It all starts with your purpose. Why do you do what you do? Because you will not be able to achieve high levels of success because it takes you have to overcome a lot of entropy. You have to overcome a lot of entropy to rise above and be highly successful. So it starts with your purpose. And if it's about money, you won't last, especially after you're out of survival. If it's about personal gain, you'll do a little more. But my personal experience, Joe, from what I've seen, is two things. And this is directly related to me also. They have a high internal pain thermometer. Their perception of pain is way greater than yours or the average person. So they will continue to push and drive when everybody else around them and their peers are taking it easy. The second factor is they have a strong sense of the purpose. It's not just about the money. It's now about a conviction and a sense of duty. And we're going to go into that topic next, Joe. So let me go ahead and go into the next topic here.
Okay.
And the next topic is, and it falls in line with, if you're doing it for the money, it doesn't matter what I say or do as a consultant. You won't do very well in life. It doesn't matter. And if you do, it will not be sustaining and lasting, because money does not give that kind of purpose or drive and overcome obstacles. The road will be tough. And so when you're out of survival and out of security, and it's just about the money, you'll quit. You'll quit because the road always gets tough. So let's go ahead and start talking about why are we doing what we're doing. So the first exercise we did is we tried to focus your clarity. In other words, what am I really trying to do? I'm trying to up your standard. I'm trying to raise your game. I'm trying to increase your clarity, but can I tell you to have increased clarity? No. I need you to do it. I need you to do it. Now, is it going to happen all at once? No. We'll periodically going to work on this until you show up to the plate and knock my socks off. So we're going to work on your clarity. Why? Because your clarity is going to give you purpose. It's going to give you indestructible, undeniable. See, you can't tell me chiropractic doesn't work. Why? Because I have an absolute high conviction. Why? Because when I was 15 years old, I couldn't sit down. None of the healthcare systems, the standard healthcare systems worked, medicine, etc. I went to a chiropractor. And in 3 visits, in 4 days, I was 100% pain-free and I could sit down. How important is sitting down? Is that a primary need? Yeah, you need to sit down eventually in your life, don't you? Yes. So did it have a greater impact on me because it was a primary need? Yes, it did. See, if it was just based on materialism, it wouldn't have had an impact on me. But it hit my core. It went to my core. What did that do? It affected my conviction. You or nobody else can tell me otherwise. I will go through you, around you, and over you. Because that's called conviction. It was a personal, emotional experience. And then, of course, when I started practicing, it went to a whole nother level. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So let me take a few minutes and let's pull up a couple components here. I want you to see. Couple things. It starts with your clarity, your focus, which will affect your drive, your motivation. Number 2, is it about back pain? Is it about neck pain? Well, how much potential business is there? Well, we do know it's the second leading cause to the hospital. We do know it's the second leading workers' compensation injury. It's the second leading cause to going to the medical doctor, back pain alone. So we know there's a lot of back pain out there, but we also know that they're not looking for chiropractors. So is it about back pain? Why do you do what you do? Well, let me share some light with you. So let's pull in some of this other information now. This is morbidity and mortality. Morbidity, and you can't see that because I didn't share the screen. This is morbidity and mortality right here. These are different researchers. Doctor diagnosed arthritis. In other words, arthritis is joint pain. How important is joint pain? Do chiropractors treat joint pain? Yeah, that's what we do. We treat primarily joint pain through the 3 ranges of motion that on occasion affect the somatovisceral reflex. That's what chiropractors do. So we're talking about arthritis, joint pain. What's the prevalence of doctor-diagnosed? Well, in the total population, you can see here, they're dividing it up by sex and body mass, etc. But you can see it can range anywhere from 25% up to 35%. That's the frequency. In this one, you can see how does chronic pain affect adults? How does arthritis, joint inflammation, affect people? Nearly half, 47%, have at least one other disease or condition, etc. How does it affect physical activity? People with joint pain, arthritis, are less likely to be physically active. The activity will cause pain. The symptoms will get worse, damage your joints. 44% of adults with arthritis report no leisure time physical activity, compared with 36% of those that don't. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at people with arthritis and joint pain. 44% of them have no leisure time physical activity. Now, is leisure time physical activity a primary need? No. Leisure time physical? No. Is it a security based? It could go into that category, more of a socialization based category. Okay. So, let's go to the next one. Joint pain. Prevalence of joint pain among adults. How does it affect their physical and mental functioning and quality of life? Joint pain. Caused by many conditions. Osteoarthritis, the most common cause of joint pain. And we know osteoarthritis is directly from micro and macro trauma and altered joint dysfunction, biomechanics. That's exactly what chiropractors treat in the 3 ranges of motion. So we have this thing called joint pain that's caused by arthritis that's affecting the ranges of motion. Osteoarthritis. 30% of adults 18 years of age or older reported symptoms such as pain, aching, swelling, just in the knee itself. So these are I'm just trying to share with you, what are we really dealing with here? Are we dealing with back pain and neck pain? This is lost time from work or school. Injuries, lost time from work or school. Physical damage, traumatic event. In other words, will it affect work? How important is work? Is that a primary need? Yes, it is. Could you maybe say school's a primary? No. We'd probably say it could be somewhat security-based, more socialization-based, materialism-based. Work is definitely one of them. So what are we really doing here? Here's the prevalence and common causes of disability among adults. Lost productivity. We already know that low back pain is the most expensive workers' compensation injury. But let's go into, let's see what we got here. We got anywhere, let's see, 41, three of the most common causes of disabilities right here. Arthritis or rheumatism of the back or spine. 44 to 47 million people. 44 to 47 million people. How prevalent is this? This is a major, there's a lot of people with joint dysfunction, joint pain, back pain, disability, limitations, restrictions. Next one, mechanical back pain. What does this do? We know it's prevalent. We know it's huge. In other words, there's a lot of volume. But what exactly are we doing here? What exactly are we treating? 1 in 5 Americans will have 25 total back pain. Musculoskeletal impairments with low back pain. Ranking is the most common factor. We already know 80% of the population have back pain, mechanical back pain at some point in their life that limits or restricts their work. 90% of that is recurring. 90%. 90%. Cases of back pain, conventional care, There's a couple points that I want to point out here. The pain-emotion connection. So are we just treating back pain? Are we treating neck pain? Is that what we're doing? Low back pain can be more than just physical. Can have a profound effect on your mood, every part of your life. Chronic pain that interferes with every aspect of daily living. How important is concentration to a primary need? How important is appetite? How important is sleep? These are all the byproducts of pain, back pain, arthritic pain. So here it says they won't be able, people are constantly worried that they won't be able to go to work or about their daily activities. How important are daily activities? Getting dressed, showering, bathing. In a sense, it makes people depressed, anxious, irritable. How does that affect your relationships with your spouse, your children? What are you really doing? Are you treating back pain or neck pain? Is that what you're doing? Pain is more than just an unpleasant sensation affecting the nervous system. It affects your perceptions, feelings, thoughts. It affects you as a human being. It affects your life. Doesn't affect mortality. It certainly affects morbidity. The physical and emotional toll of living in pain leads 1/3 of people with chronic pain become clinically depressed. 75% are being treated for depression and report physical symptoms, including pain, emotional distress. What are you doing? Are you treating back or neck pain? Is that what you're doing? And this talks a little bit about the volume. 80% of the population will experience low back pain during their lives. Begin with 95% of those recovering in a few months. 90% recur. Why does it recur? Altered arthrokinematics. Altered movement. It's always going to return when it's not moving normal. Always. It says 20 to 40% here. Within 1 year of working population. Recurrences up to 85%. Are you treating pain? Is that what you're doing? Are you treating back pain and neck pain? Low back pain lasting 3 months was reported. So it says this particular study, low back pain lasting a whole day past 3 months was reported by 24% of the respondents. Neck pain, 13%. What's that say about the volume, the amount of people that have back pain, neck pain, discomfort that's affecting them in their socialization, their security, even their primordial needs? How many of them? Arthritis and their limits in the usual activities of their work. Arthritis limits people in their usual activities of their work and for pay. That's called survival. Activity limitation up to 42%. Work limitation up to 31%. This is affecting people's lives. Arthritis limits millions of adults in their usual activities, paid work. In adults, this was in limits people, okay? The specific functioning limitations of people with joint pain. What's the most common joint pain? 40%, very difficult. Look at the problems, and you may not be able to read this, of the physical limitations with arthritic joint pain. Number 1 is stooping and bending. How important is stooping and bending to living a life? To survival, to security, to socialization? Are you going to be able to bowl with your group. You can't stoop or bend. Let me ask you, how much money would you be willing to take? How big of a check would you be willing to take for me to give you to where you couldn't stoop or bend without being painful the rest of your life? How big of a check would you be willing to accept? Look at number 2, stand. Of course, you know, as practicing chiropractors, there's people that can't stand for long periods of time because of their back. And a lot of times they can't stand for a long period of time holding their children. Holding their children. How valuable is that? That you can't hold your child standing because your back hurts. How big of a check would you be willing to accept to not hold your child, your 4 or 6-year-old child? How much money? Walk, restrictions with walking, pushing, stairs. In other words, this is called the functional capacity. This is called life. This is what you do in life. This is how you move around in life. These are all the things that are affected with joint-related pain. Adults reporting joint pain or stiffness in the past 30 days. In any joint, up to 30%. Up to 30%. 30. How prevalent is this? It's huge. Prevalence of arthritis. 50 million adults, arthritis. Osteoarthritis being number 1. Doctor-diagnosed arthritis, 22%. 50% of 65 or older, 50%. 67 million Americans age 18 or older, doctor-diagnosed arthritis. $27 million adults, osteoarthritis. So, what are you doing? What are you doing? What do you say to yourself every day? What do you say to your staff? What do you say to your patients? Well, I'll tell you what I said to my staff. Now, I got into chiropractic because I had a personal conviction. You couldn't tell me otherwise. But it didn't take very long of treating patients before I knew that it had little, if anything, to do with back pain or neck pain. What it had to do with is human relationships. I was affecting and impacting human relationships. And I always used to tell my staff, said, what we do is we restore relationships and save lives. That's what we do. And I would educate them on the 3 phases of healing, how it got that way, the different types of therapeutics that are necessary to prevent a permanent injury and how you naturally heal. Then I would educate them on the patients who came through that door. And we would pull their files, and we would not just look at back pain. Because when I took their history, I looked into how it restricted or limited their life. And so I'd share that with the staff, that somebody couldn't work. They were maybe losing their job. They were afraid of losing their job. They were painful, and they had to work because they were afraid of losing their job. Their depression, their anxiety with their loved ones. Patients who had pain and back pain, who had bad and tumultuous relationships with their spouse or significant other because they couldn't have sex. They couldn't have sex without there being pain. That's called a primordial need. How much money would you be willing to accept to not have sex the rest of your life because it's painful? How will that affect your personal relationships, your significant other? You see, there's a story, and you've probably heard the story, that somebody pulled up, and there was this building going on, and they asked this one bricklayer, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm laying bricks." He goes around the corner, and the other guy goes, "What are you doing?" The guy says, "I'm building a home." Same spot, same facility. Goes to the next guy and says, "What are you doing?" And the guy says, "I'm building a cathedral for people to worship their God. That's the difference between doing it for money, doing it for personal gain, doing it for conviction, or doing it for sense of duty. That's the difference. And so where do you need to be if you want to be highly successful? If you're focused on the money, there's probably not a whole lot I can do for you. If you start focusing on not just, and money's important. I don't want to discount the money. And you need the money to get out of survival and security, help stabilize your family, etc., help family members. So I don't want to, but if it's about the money, you'll always be perpetually performing at a low level, the lowest level of performance there are. And I'll tell you, there's only one person that really is going to care about you when you do it and it's all about the money and just about the money. That creates a lot of resentment. And there's only really one person that's going to care about you, and that's the person who wants your money. So you got to watch where your mind goes. And another little story, I worked with a doctor, consulted with a doctor, and he did not even know this. Everything he did was about the money to his staff. I mean, every other patient that left, as soon as they left, he'd run up the front desk and ask them, did they pay? Would they pay? He constantly focused their attention on money. And so they, in other words, he trained them that it was about the money. And little did he know that there's tremendous resentment with people. And when I talked to those staff members when he wasn't around, they even said that. They even said, oh, he's just about the money. Those staff members didn't go above and beyond. They did below average, and he had high turnover. Is there any reason why he had high turnover, unsatisfied staff, and below average productivity? Well, and guess who he always blamed? He blamed the staff. No, he took people that were probably normal that came to him, and he took them into the gutter. He demotivated them, and he didn't even know he was doing it. Well, see, you can do the opposite. You can do that for yourself. You can take yourself to another level depending on your self-talk. Are you laying bricks? Are you impacting and affecting people's lives to where they can pick up their child without pain and hug their child? This is what happens as practicing chiropractors. You guys know this, and sometimes you just let it go. I mean, you just don't even see what you're doing. You're changing and impacting lives, and you're not really even paying attention to it. You're focusing on a lot of the minuscule crap that you probably don't even need to be paying attention to, or should have been cleaned out with 1 or 2 staff meetings and a little bit of training. So what are you doing? What are you telling yourself? What are you telling your staff? And of course, ultimately, how does that come across to your patients? Because it will come across. It'll come across in your clarity. It'll come across in your conviction. It'll come across in your purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? And the last reason is, if you have very low purpose, and it's because of money or personal gain, you won't do very well in business with chiropractic for a lot of reasons, but one reason is, remember, only 8% of the population is seeking chiropractic care. I haven't met one doctor yet who maximized his time for money just from advertising. Not one. So to some degree, you're going to have to do some type of educational sales to access the 92%, the people who are not looking for you to maximize your time for money, to some degree. And if it's just about the money, you're not going to want to do very much or anything to access that 92% because it's not going to be very motivating. And which means in turn, you're not going to have a very good practice, which means also in turn, you probably won't have as good of a life or security for your family and friends. So what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Is it about back pain? I got to tell you, it has nothing to do with back pain. Being a chiropractor has nothing to do with neck pain. It has everything to do with depression, attitude, relationships, primary needs, activities of daily living. In other words, functioning as a human being. Because if you didn't have those facts in your life, life becomes pretty miserable. Pretty miserable. And that's why I say there's probably only one category where chiropractic actually affects mortality, and that's suicide. Because when you're in pain and you have a lot of restrictions or discomfort, and it's affecting your life and your relationships and your primordial needs, your security and your relationships, eventually you don't want to live life. And suicide is a major top 10 killer. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. Chronic pain, inflammation, back pain, etc. It wouldn't surprise me at all to actually dig deep into these people and see how much of those suicides are actually related to joint discomfort, joint pain that affected them and permeated their lives in miserable ways. So, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? That's what's important. So, having said that, what we're going to do is we're going to work on your clarity. Why? To increase your purpose. Why? To increase your confidence. Why? Because I'd like you to make more money, but it can't be about the money. I'd like you to start changing people's lives, more people than what you're doing. And when you give, exchange, and abundance, I can tell you from personal experience, you will make more money, you will get more personal gain, accolades, you will get more in your life than you can ever imagine. How you can impact and change people's lives when you give, exchange, and abundance, and you do it with purpose, a higher purpose, and a higher focus. It's a tremendous, tremendous feeling in life when you get up and it's not about the money. And you want to go at it 100 miles an hour. And that's how I was able to open one office after the next. After I made $200,000 a year, $500,000 a year, $1 million a year. I got up with just as much vigor and excitement when I was making $2 million a year. Didn't buy anything more than probably after $250,000 a year could have bought me. After about $250,000 a year, plane, boat, limo, condo, you can get all that with $250,000 a year. The degree at which you get will be variable. But after that, it doesn't matter. You got all that stuff. And when it's about your purpose and your sense of duty, that's when it's exciting and you can't wait to get to work. And you treat these people, you hear their stories, and you impact lives. That's when you want to help that associate because you know he's going to help a lot of people. And he knows you're going to help him help a lot of people. Your mark is going to go through him. So there's 600,000 people a year that get treated directly through my training.